Today is September the 30th, 2021. My name is Tanya Finchum, and along with me is Ben Pollard. I'm with the Oklahoma State University Library, and Ben is a retiree from the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. We're in rural Pawnee County to speak with Dr. Dan Sebert, and is Executive Director of the National Watershed Coalition and a former employee of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission from 1975 to 2004. So, and you guys have been receiving the 2002 OECD President's Award.
Yes, ma'am.
And then 2019 inductee into the Conservation Hall of Fame, Oklahoma Conservation Hall of Fame.
That is correct.
Okay. This interview will be part of the Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. So thank you for talking with us today.
My pleasure.
Before we get into your conservation experience, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a lifelong Oklahoman. I was born in Clinton, Oklahoma. Grew up there in Clinton. My grandparents on my dad's side were Clintonites. My dad and my grandfather were dentists in Clinton. My mother's people were farmers in Harmon County, Oklahoma, Hollis, Oklahoma. By the time I came along, they had moved from the farm to town. But I grew up in Clinton, went to Clinton High School, then took a few classes at Southwestern State at Weatherford, and then on to Oklahoma Baptist University, where I got a Bachelor of Science degree. From there, I went on down Highway 177 to Ada and got a master's degree at East Central, and then went north on 177 to Stillwater and did a PhD at Oklahoma State.
So in high school, did you have any idea what their plan was going to be for your life course there?
No. I think, my mother probably had plans for me, which was to become a dentist. My dad passed away when I was 8 years old, and so I was raised by some strong women and a good grandfather there in Clinton. But one thing for sure was I was going to go to OBU because there are 15 people in my family that went there at one time or another. But being God's most least likely servant, I wasn't sure how that was going to fly, and had a lot of fun there, made a lot of good friends, and got a fantastic education. So that was the good part. I was just dying to go to OSU. I wanted to go to OSU for all kinds of reasons, but I had an interest in wildlife, and at the time that was the place to go for that. But had to take a little detour through Shawnee and then on down to Ada before I finally got up there. And then when I did my PhD, I was one of the first doctoral students in the environmental science program. So my program was about a third education, a third wildlife biology, and a third ag econ, because the environmental science program offered me the flexibility to mix and match and do that. So I kind of prided myself in my professional life. Many times when you're in a room with a group of people talking about conservation issues, the economists are talking one language, the biologists are talking another, and there were times that I felt like I was the guy that was in the room that understood what all of them were saying, even though they weren't really listening or understanding each other. So that's kind of how I got involved and how my educational background played out.
So when you're graduating with your bachelor's degree, what were you going to do with that?
I didn't know. I knew I needed a job. I did enough education classes that I could teach school. So I started my career teaching earth science in the Shawnee public schools and coaching junior high football. growing up in Clinton, I wasn't a star football player by any stretch of the imagination, but I played on 3 teams that went to the state championship and won 2 of them. So I knew a little something about football. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed coaching football there in Shawnee. But the school teaching part, I was a terrible junior high teacher. I mean, self-professed. My attention span was pretty short. I was 7 years older than the kids that I was teaching, and the old junior high was in this beautiful park with giant oak trees that you could see right out my ground floor window. So starting about the 1st of October, when the leaves started to turn, it was torture for me to stay in there in that room and try to teach school. And if you could track down some of those kids who are in their 60s today, I'm sure they'd tell you how horrible I was. But I just knew that I wasn't cut out for that, to
wasn't your fit.
Staying indoors. And so somehow I got word, I know how it was. A guy that I deer hunted with was a textbook salesman from Atoka. And he told me about a program at East Central that a professor down there named Don Kellogg was running, that was a conservation education class for teachers. And he was friends with Don, and he knew me, and he knew Don, and he knew we'd get along. So I enrolled in that. And when I enrolled in that, the intent was to go to that summer school class on conservation education and then go back to Shawnee Public Schools and do some of that in my classroom. Well, Dr. Kellogg and I became famous friends and partners in crime. And when I finished that class, there was something going on over here that as a 20-something I was totally unaware of, but Don Kellogg was talking to a gentleman named Walter Woolley, who was one of the commissioners at the Oklahoma Conservation Commission, who was talking to Leonard Solomon, who was the then executive director of the Conservation Commission. And they were talking about conservation education and the districts having more of an education program. They asked Don Kellogg, was there someone in that class that you would recommend for that job? And he recommended me. And the rest, as they say, is history. Anyway, so that was how I went to work for the Pontotoc County Conservation District, was because of Don Kellogg, Walt Woolley, and Leonard Solomon. And it was certainly an adventure. While my granddad on my mom's side was a farmer and sent all 6 of his kids to school from that farm. They were teachers. One was an MD and PhD psychiatrist that founded a psychiatric institute in Wichita, Kansas. There was one boy and 5 girls, and they were all, really, really intelligent people. My mom used to do the homework, I think, for my Uncle Buddy and for my dad, who then went on to dental school. And so she was maybe the brains behind that outfit. But anyway, don't know where I was going with that, but so I started working in Ada for the district and working with Dr. Kellogg and doing outdoor classrooms and doing teacher training and workshops. Did that for a year or so, and then they decided that they wanted to expand that and let me work in multiple conservation districts. So we kind of took that show on the road, and upon request would go to a district and assist them with getting into the local school system and doing outdoor classrooms at schools, and then doing educational conservation camps for teachers and for students. I worked with Dr. Don Kellogg from East Central, Dr. Ted Mills from Oklahoma State University, who's professor emeritus and nationally known environmental ed guy. Larry McKinney, who was the science coordinator at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. Howard Potts, who also worked at the State Department, and a gentleman from Tulsa, John Roller, worked several summers where we did teacher workshops. We'd have 30 or 40 teachers at East Central, at Tulsa, and then at Oklahoma State, and we'd do 2 weeks in the classroom at each of those places, then bring them all together, and we would headquarter like at the Goddard Youth Camp down in the Arbuckle Mountains and have classes and so on and so forth. So that was kind of the strategy for, you know, spreading the word and recruiting teachers and that kind of thing. Had a lot of fun, made a lot of good friends. Some I still see today.
And got you outdoors a little bit.
It did. It was my salvation. I was a whole lot better teaching under an oak tree than I was staring at one through a wire screen partition. So
how long were you in Pontotoc doing that?
From 1975 to 1980. In 1980, while I was there in Pontotoc, I did a master's degree almost all at night there at East Central. And when I finished that, Dr. Kellogg and others were encouraging me to go on, and Dr. Mills, who I'd worked with some, was, you know, kind of dangling a carrot. And again, being a little bit naive and young, there were people having discussions over on the side about maybe what I should do. So Solomon said, I want to move you to Stillwater. I have a thing worked out here with Dr. Mills, and I want you to go up there and work with Dr. Mills. And you can also be at the Soil Conservation Service state office, you know, and move in there and have a relationship with Dwayne Phillips, who was the public information officer at the time. So anyway, I moved to Stillwater in 1980 and began to work. We set up a Center for Environmental Education in Gunderson Hall there on campus, and had 2 or 3 good friends that were going to school there that came in and worked there when I was there. And we did lots of training for Ted Mills and lots of teacher training. And because I was on campus, I was afforded the opportunity to take some classes and so on. And so I just kind of kept plugging away, and eventually polished off a PhD program there. So
that worked out well then.
It did work out well. And I have a lot of gratitude for Leonard Solomon's guidance and his willingness to put me in that situation and allow me to go to school while I worked for him. A lot of my success professionally is due to the base that Mr. Solomon put down, and his ability to see through some of my baloney and inspire me on to greatness. and I'm sure Ben can verify that, but a lot of my professional success that have a lot of gratitude for all goes back to Saul and the support and the training and the direction that he provided. So,
do you remember anything in particular about him, like advice he may have given you, or characteristics or something of him?
He called me in one day and he said, "I want you to go over here to this meeting," and I don't remember what the topic of the meeting was now, but I told him, I said, "Well, I don't know a whole lot about that subject." He said, "Yeah, I know," but he said, "I can send you there and you won't screw it up." So apparently I had coworkers at that time who had a tendency to express opinions even when they really didn't know anything. So I guess I was the safe guy maybe in the room, or smart enough to keep my mouth shut for a while. But anyway, he had been an extension director, and he understood the importance of education. He was a great communicator, just in ways that people can't imagine the way he was effective at communicating with people, managing people. But I think everybody that worked there at one time or another sat in his office and thought they must have been the most important person on that staff, because in a good way, he would give you his entire attention. He probably knew the outcome of what this conversation was going to be before it occurred, but he engaged you and he made you feel important. He made you feel like what you thought, what you saw, what you said mattered. And I think that's important in building relationships and having a good staff. And he could be very serious and to the point about things, but then before you left, he was off on some story or something. But I just think his ability to communicate was probably one of the top things.
Would you consider him a mentor of sorts anyway?
You bet. When I walked into the Pontotoc County Conservation District and Ada Field Office of the then Soil Conservation Service, the first guy I met, the district conservationist for Pontotoc County, was Dwayne Phillips. Dwayne and I still work together. We speak or meet weekly. He assists me on Watershed Coalition activities, but he also, when you say mentor, he's an extremely important person in my career and an extremely important friend of mine. I don't know if anybody's ventured off into the topic of blatant disregard for the bureaucracy, but
go to it.
Dwayne knew how to get things done. The Soil Conservation Service, which is now NRCS, when I first started interacting with them, they were one of the more rigid, bureaucratic, followed a kind of a military pattern of organization and command and control. And that was just totally foreign to me. And I was just enough of a smart ass that I like to aggravate them and poke at them a little bit. In some cases, that was paralyzing in terms of getting anything done because of the rigid nature of the system and the governance up and down the line. But Dwayne knew how to make things happen. Now, that didn't make him the most popular guy with his immediate supervisor and a couple of guys up the line, but ultimately, when he rose in his career up to the state office to work with Roland Willis, the state conservationist up there, really served him well because Dwayne knew how to work through and around those bureaucratic things and make things happen. And so that was something I kind of learned from him early on. I became a little more refined at getting things done rather than I figured out the difference between a fly swatter and a sledgehammer. If you could get it done with a fly swatter, that was probably the good way to do it rather than hitting somebody over the head with a sledgehammer. And Dwayne, he taught me some things about finesse and protocol. And I know Ben would tell you what a stickler I am for protocol. But I actually got to the point where I could kind of deal with those people and play their game and do what we need to do to get the work done. So Dwayne's he's an important mentor of mine for sure. And like I say, still a good friend.
What else? Roland had a particular way of managing people too, didn't he?
He did. He did. Ben mentioned something. I wrote an appreciation letter to Roland, and in it I mentioned Max Dominic and also Mavis Jones, two engineers that I was privileged to work with. And actually, when Mavis retired from SCS, he came to work for the commission and worked. He worked for me. He worked with me. But all three of those guys were special people in my career. And really, when people talk about the good things that SCS or NRCS did back in the day, it was people like those three that made it happen. So,
boots on the ground too.
I'm sorry?
Boots on the ground.
Yes. Yeah. So, spent a lot of time in the car with Max Dominic over in eastern Oklahoma, looking at various projects and looking at repairs that were needed on things that SCS had done in the past. Really enjoyed traveling with Max. A lot of idiosyncrasies and kind of superstitions based in his Native American background, and we really enjoyed each other, and I enjoyed traveling with him, and just can't say enough good things about Max. Learned some things from Max too. If you got in a conversation about something that happened, some question about, say, an engineering activity or some action that was taken, and it happened on April 20th, 1964, and people were on opposite sides of that. If Max was in the conversation, he'd just open this big desk drawer and reach in there, and he'd flip through there, and he'd come up with a tablet, and he'd flip through there. And he said, "Well, April 20th, 64, I was there. Bob Gray was there. Looks like the technician from the Geary Field office was there, and the contractor was there, and this decision, and this decision, and this decision, and Bob Gray signed off on that, and then later so-and-so inspected that, and that's kind of what happened there, back in the drawer," and just cut the crap, I mean, Max's documentation of his work taught me something about what I needed to do. I kind of need to revisit that in my old age, because I tend to forget things before I write them down. But Max, he was the consummate documentation guy, and just a incredible volume of information about watershed work and structures he'd worked on and meetings that he had been to, and that's important, because when a conflict came up, or there was some question, or somebody, some interloper came in from the side, trying to say, well, this is what they meant, didn't go far with Max. He'd just pull out that diary for that week, for that year, and he'd say, this is what happened. So I gained a great appreciation for that. Another guy I would be remiss to leave out of this conversation is Don Vanderseipen. Don was the water resources. The title probably was Assistant State Conservationist for Water Resources, is probably what the title was. We went through a lot of title things here in Oklahoma, some of them nationally driven and some of them locally or state driven, that came up with some crazy titles. But anyway, Don was the main guy in charge of the Watershed program in Oklahoma. And up until Leonard Solomon tagged me with that, there hadn't been a great deal of activity on the district side or the commission side in the Watershed arena. And so when I was given that responsibility, because I wouldn't screw it up, Don was really welcoming to have a partner at the commission and to somebody that wanted to work with the sponsors, which were the districts. And I learned a lot from him. His number 2 guy at that time was a gentleman named Bill Porter, and Bill later filled that position after Don retired. And both of those guys, just great Americans, great workers, good partners. Don was another guy that would do what it took to get the job done. If the rigidity of the bureaucracy was getting in the way of something, or you had somebody who had the Watershed manual out and they were blinded by it, well, it says this right here and that means this, and we can't do anything outside of it. Vander Seiple would shake his head and say, no, here's what we need, here's where we need to get on this. And it wasn't a matter of breaking the law or anything, but it was the common sense approach that your interpretation is being prohibitive of what our responsibility is to do a job and complete a job. So this is, you need to adjust your perspective here and understand that this is our responsibility. This is the desired outcome. And your job is to figure out how to get from here to there, not to get back over here and throw down more hurdles and roadblocks based on your interpretation of some regulations. So really had an appreciation for him. Bill Porter, he cut his teeth under Don, if you will, and there was a certain amount of that get it done that came to Bill. He and I worked on some projects where they were difficult things and there were angry people involved and there were issues, and I loved working with Bill on those things because it was a give and take. There were things he could do that I couldn't, things I could do that he couldn't, but together we could get it all done. And he was really a good partner.
Was that some of the things going on when you were in Stillwater, or had you already moved to?
That some of them were initially in Stillwater. I went from Stillwater back to Oklahoma City to the commission office. Solomon called me in and he said, I'm going to retire. And he said, I think I know what's going to happen here, but I'm not sure. But he said, I think instead of working remotely in Stillwater like you're doing now, he said, I think you need to be here. He said, for 2 reasons. He said, one, whoever takes this job needs to see you every day to recognize that you're an employee. You're not some unknown guy up there in Stillwater that gets a paycheck from us. So he said, you need to be probably back down here. He said, second, he said, the new person coming in, whoever they hire, he said is gonna need your perspective, is gonna need your outlook. You need to be in here so that you can provide that service to whoever sits in this chair. And I wasn't too excited about going to Oklahoma City for several reasons, but I did, and I commuted from Stillwater down there, so I didn't really have to give up my spot in God's country. But anyway, I drove to the city many years from Stillwater, commuted. But anyway, so I went back in there, and I hired a good guy to do that, and I enjoyed working with him. I worked with Leonard Solomon as executive director, Mason Mungle as an executive director, and Mike Thralls as an executive director. Worked under those 3 guys. Worked with several NRCS, SCS state conservationists, but worked for those three guys. All 3 of them different. All three of them, very good people, solid. Each had a different skill set, a different perspective on conservation and conservation districts. But really I have great appreciation for all three of those men. They all treated me well, dealt with my shortcomings, and provided me the freedom to do what I think was some good work.
So your role changed a little bit from educator
It did.
to
It did. When I went back down to Oklahoma City, it was more in the capacity as a program director for conservation districts, which included the education function and upstream flood control work. Later, the cost share program, conservation cost share, a roadside erosion program where districts worked with county commissioners, and then overall just troubleshooting district relations and that kind of thing. I had a education person that worked for me, an administrative person that worked for me, a lawyer that worked for me, and some watershed guys, which that's probably one of the things I did that I think had a lasting impact, was hiring some technicians to assist districts with the watershed work. But so I when I went back in the capacity of, I guess you'd say, a division director.
Okay.
More responsibility, broader interest area.
Okay.
All right.
We're talking about staff, so
yeah.
Let's get into that a little bit.
So, the watershed structures were beginning to be a problem because of the age and because of the beaver population, and then some flaws that are built into the program where sponsors are responsible for some things, but in Oklahoma's case, didn't really have significant funding to address the issues that were their responsibility. So those were some of the problems that needed to be solved. Oklahoma has 2,107 upstream flood control lakes or dams, depending on what you want to talk about, the dam or the lake, because the conversation changes depending on which one you're talking about. But we have conservation districts that are sponsors of projects that have more upstream flood control structures in their conservation district than some states have in the entire state. So it's a tremendous workload and burden to be a good sponsor, meet your responsibilities, and do things right, keep the dams functioning, keep the benefits that they provide flowing, and keep people safe. So that's a big deal. Those are all kind of things we had to figure out how to address. We hadn't had a tremendous budget for that. We had some good folks in several different districts, and so we came up with a strategy to hire some watershed technicians, some people that were working out in conservation districts doing watershed work, that knew their way around the dams and knew how to inspect and knew how to work on towers and things like that. So I hired 3 guys. I hired George Moore from Custer County. He was a district employee. Hired Dennis Boney from the Garvin Conservation District at Pauls Valley. He was doing a lot of work down there with building siphons and doing some work. And then I hired Johnny Pelly from Grady County. Grady County, Garvin County, and Custer County, all 3 had over 100 structures each. So these guys had kind of been baptized by fire, if you will. But anyway, I hired them. and was able to secure some funds, not a great deal, but to get them equipped with trucks and trailers, and we started buying some equipment. We started building siphons. When a tower gets stopped up and you can't get out there and open the gate, or you can't get it unplugged, beavers putting mud and sticks and things, or humans putting things in there that don't belong there. You have to be able to get the water down. And so Dennis had a lot of expertise on siphons, and we started building siphons. We bought 2 huge John Deere irrigation pumps and put them on trailers so that we could, if we needed to, we could bring a pump in and actually begin to pump along the siphoning. And one of the ideas that an employee out in Dewey County had was to use a sewer cleanout machine that cities use to jet lines. It's a high pressure water pump with basically a fire hose nozzle on it that you run up and wash out a sewer line till it's open and flows. He got to thinking about using one of those to maybe try to open towers, to jet the debris in towers, or to go in the pipe and jet the pipe. And so there was a company in Oklahoma City that sold them, and I said, okay, I'm game. I'll go look. Well, we went over there and we went out and we looked at the machine, and I thought, yeah, that's a pretty good deal. It probably will work. And we went back in the office there at the company, and sitting in the corner was a robot. It was a little wheeled robot with a camera on top of it and some cables and things. And I said, what's that? The guy said, well, it's our pipe inspection camera that we use. It will go in a 6-inch sewer pipe, or there's tires that you can put on it. You know, if you have a larger pipe you want to drain, but you can go in there and it sends a TV signal back down this cable to a small closed circuit television, and you can inspect sewer pipes and water pipes and utility stuff. Well, the light bulb came on for me that that's kind of, we need that. So it was expensive. I don't recall now and how much it was. It was quite a bit of money though at the time. Anyway, so I went back and talked to Mace about it, and he said, yeah, but he said, I need you to make a presentation to the commission about that. So I said, okay. So I studied up on it a little bit, and it had all kinds of attachments. And anyway, we get in commission meeting, and I'm making my pitch, and I say, you know, up in Kansas years ago, a college professor put one of these together. He glued mirrors to a ball, and he put a video camera in there, and he used shining off. I said, you know, it was kind of a Rube Goldberg type thing, but for pipe inspections. And I said, this is a motorized carriage video camera, goes up the pipe and it rotates. You can take pictures of the seams. You can take video going up the pipe. And so they're, you know, being not wise and this and that and the other. Mason, I don't know if he really wanted to know, or he was throwing me a softball, or I'm still not sure exactly what. But he says, well, Dan, he says, how does that thing go in a corrugated metal pipe? Now, the question he was asking was, how are you going to get this video if this thing is running across these corrugated metal pipes? And the answer to that question is, it had some tracks that you could put on instead of wheels, where it would just run across the tops of the corrugation. But the first thing that came to my mind, I took him literally. He said, well, how does that go on a corrugated pipe? I said, well, kind of like this. Everybody started laughing, and then I think I got around to telling him about the tracks. But we got the camera. We were the first folks to have that. Since that time, there are probably a dozen or more of them scattered around the country being used on watershed work. I think the commission is on their 3rd camera. One of the private contractors that has done lots of work in Oklahoma, Gene Peters, has his own camera. But it turned out to be a big deal. One of the first sites that we used it on was out at Cheyenne, Oklahoma. we had a structure that had no water running into the tower from the reservoir, but it had water running out the tailpipe on the backside. So the guy that saw that went, there's something right here. So we took that camera out there and ran it up in there, and sure enough, 140 some feet up in that pipe, you had water coming from outside the pipe into the pipe and going out, which is a problem. The water was, following the outside of the pipe down and washing out material and then getting back in the pipe and going out the back. Well, that's a recipe for failure. And we took that video and used it, and that particular site was the first one that was rehabilitated in Oklahoma as a pilot project. There was all kinds of hoopla and big deals that went on around it when it happened. But the point being, what they found with that camera that we bought really drove the process once they saw what was going on in there. It was an oh crap moment for them. So it became a kind of a poster child for Congressman Lucas and developing the rehabilitation amendments of 2000, and a lot of the rehab work that's gone on in the country, and millions of dollars have gone to rehab. Really, you could kind of trace it back to running that camera up there and seeing that water coming back through a concrete and steel pipe, and then and running out. And it was a sharp district employee that saw it, recognized that something wasn't right, and then we were able to use that camera to diagnose it, figure it out, and that was the first site in Oklahoma that was rehabilitated.
It was Cloud Creek?
No, it was, I can't call it off the top of my head anymore because I can barely remember what I had for breakfast, but Sandstone Creek. Yeah, it was a Sandstone Creek site up above the city of Cheyenne. But that's really kind of how that deal got started. So the camera was a big deal. They still use it a lot.
Thank goodness that robot was in the corner of the room that day.
That's right. I'm sure sooner or later that might have come together, but in fact, we went there to do one thing. We were going back in the office after hearing the sales pitch on that, and just looked over there and saw that. And the guy that was wanting the clean out machine, he was a little miffed because all of a sudden we were swarming this camera, and I was going, Larry, we'll get you your clean out machine. Relax. But we're going to get this camera too. And the cameras they've really evolved. I went to look at a camera with Gene Peters that the city of Oklahoma City uses now. It comes with a van with all of the electronics set up in the back of the van, and the camera does many things that original camera didn't do. But the city of Oklahoma City, does diagnostics on their underground lines with it every day, and that particular camera is not the one the commission owns, but it is on the East Coast. There's some folks that have that, are using it. So Oklahoma kind of pioneered that camera technology. Like I say, there was a professor up in Kansas that had a homemade rigging that got some people's attention, and then there was a 10-year lull or so where it was a novelty at meetings to see the presentation. But the technology from the utility industry coming over to the watershed industry was a big deal. So we had that. We bought some slope mowers so that we could start trying to maintain the vegetation. We had structures that had trees on them, and obviously couldn't mow, and the trees shouldn't be there. So that was an issue we dealt with. Was clearing structures. We bought slope mowers originally that they looked like a tractor with a mower deck under them, but when you got on the slope, the tractor body set straight and the mower deck tilted, and it would run down, and mow the slope. we did that, and then we figured out that there probably were some other ways to do it more efficiently. Ultimately, we started using a skid steer or two, and then about that time I departed and went and got on a conservation district board and was chairman of the board at Lincoln County for a while. And we were able to secure some equipment, a skid steer and cutter and several things over there. But then the commission followed after Lincoln County got that, and they kind of saw that it would work and was a good thing. I think the commission then bought like 10 of them and put them out with these technicians and watershed aides that they had around the state, and they began to clean up structures using the track. They're really not skid steers, they're track loaders. They're like a little skid steer, but they have tracks like a bulldozer on them. And so that turned out to be a big deal, and is an effective way to maintain the structures.
Some ODOT for right of ways.
Yeah, there are places. Putting on my Watershed Coalition hat for a minute, there are some places like in Wise County, Texas, which is North Texas. The Decatur is the county seat, where county government is a partner in taking care of some of their sites, and some of the same stuff you see on ODOT projects and turnpike projects up here. If you were in Wise County, you'd see some of that same equipment on their upstream flood control structures. So they're another one of my poster children. But I guess since we're talking about Oklahoma history, we better not say too much about Wise County, Texas.
Conservation in general, I guess.
Yeah. So then we also picked up some sprayers and had guys go to school on pesticides and herbicides that could be used adjacent to water bodies to do everything right. You have some people that have a tendency to say, well, this is how we do it on the farm. And you go, well, that's not fine for the farm, but this isn't the farm. This is, we have to follow the rules and regulations and use the proper chemicals and the proper application rates and those things. And there are several districts today that after getting their structures cleaned up, the trees cleared off of the embankments, that have a rotational program where they say they have, I think that district has 63 sites, and so they began trying to clear 5 a year, and then after they got about 3 years down the road, they'd go back and apply the herbicide on the ones they did the first year, and they're in a rotational basis to keep their vegetation under control and keep things safe. You don't want trees on the dam because you don't want the roots to penetrate the embankment, which creates a path for water, creates places animals burrow, which voids and dams are a bad thing. So it's all kind of revolves around the integrity of the embankment, the appropriate vegetation on the earthen embankment.
Any solutions for the beavers?
Yeah, we started an agreement with USDA APHIS, Animal Plant Health Industry Services, the government trappers. We began to, that's a program that's probably difficult for somebody that's not involved with it to understand, because it has state funds and federal funds mixed, and some of the guys that do the trapping are paid with state funds, some with federal funds, and the lines from an outsider's point of view kind of blur back and forth. But anyway, they primarily did coyote, prairie dog work. They didn't much care for the beaver work. It's pretty intensive, long-term stuff, and it's hard work. But they were covered up, and we were covered up with beavers. And so in order to gain some priority with them to get our problems addressed, when I was at the commission, we initiated an agreement with them that we transferred some funds to support one of their people, and in turn for that, they gave us a little more priority status when they got a call on one of the upstream flood control structures in terms of beaver work. So we had a good run with them. I think they still have an agreement with them. But those guys now are saddled with, they still have prairie dogs, they still have the coyote work they have to do. They still have the beaver work, and now they have the feral hog work. And the feral hog deal is, it's really a mess and lots of work. So I don't, like I say, I'm not up to speed on how that agreement's working now, but we did initiate that agreement. We also had some of our own people that had some skill that did some trapping, but mostly what we did was go around and clean up after the beavers were trapped, or identify active beaver locations, and then get our aphis friends to come and do the trapping. So
many different things come into play.
Yeah, lots, and kind of a multi-jurisdictional thing, and along with the multi-jurisdictional come different outlooks and attitudes toward things. You have landowners that think beavers are cute, and I guess little ones are, and they're neat to see. But when they're where they're not supposed to be, doing things they shouldn't do, then you have to remove them. I once was summoned to the governor's conference room for a little conversation about beavers, and one of the solutions that was presented at this deal by, I don't know where the lady was from now, but she had determined that in another state they were catching the beavers and putting a birth control implant, subcutaneous, on the beavers, and that she felt like that's probably what we should be doing instead of euthanizing the beavers. And anyway, that was one of the times. It was probably a good thing I was the guy at the meeting, could keep my mouth shut, even though in my head I had this whole reply running. But anyway, beavers they're a big problem. Vandalism is a problem. We've seen some unusual things. There was a lake in southern Oklahoma that the water, again, a person in the field spotted that the water was higher on the embankment than it should be. The embankment is designed for the permanent water level to be at a certain place and the wave action to be taken care of so that it doesn't erode the embankment. Well, this one, you could still see the top of the inlet of the tower, but the water was up higher on the embankment than it should have been. And to make a long story short, someone had gone out and framed up on top of the original tower a 2x6 structure that looked like the same shape as the tower. They put particle board on the outside and then plastered it with a gray plaster cement where it looked like the concrete tower, and then put a pipe inside it to raise the water level of the lake. That's a lot of work. And the guys went out there in a boat to look at it, and they were trying to figure out what the deal was, and somebody tapped on it. They went, wait a minute, it's just like tapping on a sheetrock wall, and they figured it out. So they cut a hole in it and saw what was going on and had the landowner remove that. But apparently it was quite a work of art. Looked just from the bank, looked just like a concrete tower out there like it was supposed to. But again, a sharp eye figured out it was.
Why would they? Maybe a dumb question. Why would they want it higher?
Higher water, more surface area, more places to fish,
okay,
or more water to perhaps sell to an oil company or irrigate from. I mean, lots of different reasons. But
so how do you correct that?
Well, first thing you do is you go out and you make the landowner really mad. Actually, first thing you do is try to avoid that and try to explain why it's something that shouldn't be there. And then ultimately, it has to be removed, whether it's cheerfully or grudgingly or anger-based. Sometimes it requires a district attorney to be involved. Sometimes it requires Attorney General to be involved, or it used to, but it has to be removed. Impounding water is a dangerous activity, so there are all kinds of liabilities and things that go with that. And so as a sponsor of an upstream flood control project, one of their driving motivations is to reduce the risk and reduce the opportunity for something bad to happen. Routine maintenance, fixing problems where there's human intervention. For instance, got a call about a dam down by Worcester, Oklahoma. This dam, most of these dams have a tube running through them that's anywhere from 16 to maybe 30 inches to discharge stormwater. This particular dam had a 105-inch tube. It also had an auxiliary spillway on both ends of the dam. 99% of the dams have an auxiliary spillway on one end. Auxiliary spillway is what NRCS likes to call them now. I'm kind of old school. I like to call them the emergency spillway, because when they're flowing, you kind of got an emergency. But this one had one on both ends of the dam. A guy from a state we won't mention, New Mexico, bought that. And he went down there in one of the emergency spillways, and it's nice and level. Looks like a good place, and you can see the water right there. He moved a really fancy double-wide home in there, installed a septic tank, planted trees, ran utility lines, all of which disrupted the continuity of the emergency spillway surface. Well, when it was discovered, we had to go down and talk to him. So an assistant attorney general and I went down there and stood over that, looked, and explained to him. And he said, "Son," he said, "I sold a bank for $5 million. He said, I'll spend all $5 million just to keep that house right there." And I said, "Well, how about you look at these pictures of an emergency spillway operating, and you look at these pictures of this town of Worcester before this structure was here at flood stage." And his attorney said, "We're not looking at any of your pictures. Come on, Bill, let's go." So they went over and got in their helicopter and left. And the assistant attorney general got it. He's going, "Well, yeah," he said, "that's got to come out," so on and so forth. So long story short, it did come out, and they had to pay to restore the surface conditions, but it's hard to save people from themselves. The lesson there was one I learned of: income is no respecter of intelligence.
Or the environment.
Words to live by. And that's not the only thing like that we've seen.
The biggest problem when that ownership changes and the new ones don't know.
Yeah.
Or,
if you buy one of those on a place and you have to borrow the money, when they do the title search, they should find the easements, because the easement goes with the land, and the easement should raise a red flag for somebody. Wait, there's a impoundment flood structure here. But if you're a realtor and your sale is going through, you're not really wanting to raise too much cane about that, or maybe your title attorney doesn't know what it is or whatever. But anyway, that should trigger. But if you're independently wealthy and you go buy one, you don't have to involve a lender, or a banker. Those kinds of things, can slip through. There are a couple down south on big ranches that have changed hands, and I think probably the state the district, the commission was butting heads with them when I left, and 2004, and I think they're probably still interested in a match with those guys.
I would imagine it'd be hard for the sponsors to keep tabs on who owns when there is a property ownership change.
It is to some degree, although you'd be surprised. An active, engaged board and active and engaged employees keep up with that kind of thing. They may call a place by the people that owned it 50 years ago, but this place will always be the Moon place, even though the Seberts have been here since 2006 or so. It's if somebody says, "Well, where are you?" You can say, "Well, you know where HD lived." Yeah, well, right up the hill. Well, as land changes hands, districts know that, but sometimes they don't get right out there, and and others, you go out there. I'd love to have a place with a 20-acre upstream flood control lake on it. I mean, adds value to the property, but if you bought it and in your mind you were going to put a little cabin down there by the lake, and then you find out that your cabin is got 4 feet of water in it, the first time a really big rain comes, you're unhappy and you want to blame somebody. Well, in fact, the 4 feet of water was planned, and if you'd have done your homework, you would have known your cabin needed to be up here, and even though it was a half-mile walk to go fishing, when it did rain and did flood, it wasn't going to be, your coffee table wasn't going to be flooding. So there's some tricks to the deal that if you investigate, talk to an engineer, you can live happily ever after on the banks of upstream flood control. You just got to know where the banks are. So, but anyway, when I worked there, we were able to put together a team of people, knowledgeable people to work on that stuff. NRCS was very receptive to that. We actually hired a couple of retired NRCS engineers that did engineering work for the commission on those structures. That was a big bonus. And that's putting that system together was probably one of the things I'm proudest of. Being able to assemble some really hardworking, knowledgeable people, and then being able to secure the funds to equip them and provide them with the resources they needed to go out and do their work. And after I left, they've expanded that. It's grown, which is good. It's got some staying power. So that's something I'm proud of. The other thing, as far as my career at the commission, that I'm proud of, I worked for 14 years as a conservation district employee before I became a state employee. For those 14 years, I didn't have any benefits. I worked without benefits, didn't have retirement, didn't have health insurance paid by the state. And it had been that way since day one. District employees didn't have that. When I started working in the office in Oklahoma City, that was a concern to me. When Mason Mungle became executive director, he called me in conversation and asked me, he said, "I want to do 2 or 3 things that'll put my mark on this place." I said, "Okay." He said, what do you think?" Well, one of them I talked about was watersheds. The other thing I said, the number one thing that'll let you leave a mark on this place is benefits for district employees. And we talked about that. Ben can tell you, on the surface, that sounds like it ought to be an easy sell, that people ought to want to take care of their employees. But, it's money. And it wasn't that popular with everybody. But Mason, to his credit, stuck with it. And he and Ben got that done. I think I try not to meddle or pay too much attention to what goes on with the Conservation Commission. I mean, when I left, I left. Just kind of the way I am. But I get a little intel from time to time, and there's been some time in the recent past when it looked like that might kind of come unwound, that the status of the benefits was getting a little cloudy and this and that and the other. But I think as far as things I saw while I was there, I think that district employees' benefits were one of the big deals. Made people's lives better, helped to retain good people that work there. Something I believe that people that work for you ought to have, and so that was a big deal to me. Ben probably has some perspective on that because he was in a leadership position and probably had to ride that through some difficult times. A couple of other things that my friend Ben and I were involved in when wetlands delineations came up at the federal level, and then the Department of Environment or whatever for Oklahoma decided we needed state wetland guidelines, and we had many other agencies that were thinking that we were just going to do a whitewash of that. We weren't really going to take it serious, but the mistake they made was they underestimated Mr. Pollard and myself and our desire to do a quality job. What we did agree on was that the federal regulations probably would take precedent and would rule what actually happened, but the state wetlands regulations, were equally as important. Well, some of our friends and some of our friends that used to be friends but then didn't want to be friends when we were in charge of the wetlands program wanted to take issue with what we were doing, and it's kind of telling about people's preconceived ideas about how something's going to go. But we put together a pretty solid state wetlands plan and rules and regs. Some of our big detractors, I think, really kind of fizzled when it actually came out and went into place. But defending it fell to Mr. Pollard and I, and our jobs were threatened at least once over it. And what the guy that was threatening our jobs didn't know is that neither one of us really gave a damn. So we just kind of entered that in what we call the Conservation Hall of Fame. That was a drawer that we had stuff stuck in that was just outrageous or incredibly funny to our twisted senses of humor. But anyway, the wetlands deal was something I was proud of how that turned out. There was a misfire or two on the front end with some personnel things that weren't exactly like we thought they were going to be, but once we kind of got those lined out, we had people outside the agency taking shots at us because of what they thought we were going to do. We had people inside the agency that were upset because they felt like they should be doing this, not me and Mr. Pollard. And so we had people on both ends of the spectrum mad at us, so we really figured we were doing a pretty good job, getting down the road. So we did that, and I think it worked out well. I think it served the state well. But while that's an accomplishment, it wasn't fun all the way through. So.
Yes, some of us. It took me a while to realize that there were actually wetlands in Oklahoma.
Yeah. I've got some down here in the middle of a wheat field, but
you just hear a drought so much.
Yeah. They probably got water in them today.
Did you have anything to do with the state water plans? I've read a little bit about that.
Yeah. I attended some meetings. I worked to have the infrastructure that the Watershed program represents considered and included in that. Um, and I also kind of had made a few prognostications, and I guess I could share those. But I went to several meetings, and initially I didn't see any of the tribes represented around the room. Then there were tribal representatives that came, but they sat around the perimeter. They weren't at the table discussing. And there were people that said, well, we're doing this and we're doing that and we're doing this. I said, I don't think you are, but, I'm going to stand back here and we'll let her rip. So they did. And immediately, the tribal influence was brought to bear, as it should have been. But it was an inclusive process that wasn't quite as inclusive as it needed to be. Now, there was some, I can't call the woman's name, but there was a woman that was working on that process from the water board that did a tremendous job. Great lady, super deal, but I just felt like the list of players was incomplete starting off. But my main focus on that whole deal was just to make sure that the infrastructure that the flood control program represents was included and so on. Your man Clay Pope, Mason Mungle, Mike Thralls, all those people did some great work at the legislature to put some funds behind the effort at the Conservation Commission and the effort of the districts. For a long time, Oklahoma was recognized as the premier state for watershed work and for sponsor operation and maintenance and those kinds of things. Of late, our friends to the south in Texas have probably outdone us a little bit, but it has initially their success in Texas was the Conservation Commission's counterparts in Texas saying, well, look what Oklahoma is doing. And in Austin, we can't have that. We got to do more than Oklahoma's doing. And the Texas watershed folks have been pretty successful at their legislature. Most recently, they got an appropriation on the order of like $250 million to do watershed work in Texas, some of which goes to operation and maintenance, some to rehab. But Clay, Mike Thralls, Mason, Trey Lamb now, those guys have all had an impact at the legislature and have managed to get the program on the legislature's radar screen where they've got some funding coming. The commission itself has managed its rehab money and reinvested funds they receive for managing construction contracts and administering the program. They have reinvested that in watershed work. So Oklahoma still has one of the best programs around. And again, I try not to meddle in their watershed business, which is why I keep talking about Texas. But they're still nationally known. And when we did some Watershed Coalition workshops and training sessions here, and we'd have people from 30 or 40 different states come in, and they couldn't believe that a conservation district had like 147 dams that were taken care of, because in their state they had 93. And I said, yeah, they've got 147 here, and there's 163 there, and 189 over here. So it's a tremendous, tremendous challenge. But the commission's done a good job of working to stay even and to keep dams safe, keep people safe, and keep the natural resource benefits that those provide.
since you seem to enjoy that work so well, but you still transitioned out of it in 2004, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I want to talk about one more thing
Okay.
there.
Okay.
The cost share program.
Okay. Yes.
Got called in to the office, and basically they said, "Tag, you're it. You need to do this and that and the other. We need a state cost share program that supports producers, and districts can administer it, and districts should receive credit for putting conservation on the ground, this, that, and the other." And that's a little bit of an oh crap moment, but the savior in that process was a gentleman named Mike Sharp. Incredibly intelligent guy, ag and farm background, good communicator, technological genius, just a person at the Conservation Commission that if there ever was $1 million, maybe a $2 million employee, it's Mike Sharp. I mean, can't say enough good stuff about Mike. And Mike, rather than starting from scratch, writing a cost share program, Mike researched. He found guidelines, rules. He tweaked them to fit the agency and to fit the state. Other people came into a work group and worked on this deal. But anyway, I give a ton of credit to Mike Sharp for laying the groundwork for the cost share program. And so we got all that in place, the administrative stuff, the rules. Then we started getting the allocation. We started putting the money out. We got some good conservation on the ground. I'm not sure the public relations aspect of it has ever been as viable as probably the leadership at the time wanted it to be. And I say that because of this. And when a farmer goes into a USDA Service Center / Conservation District office, those employees don't wear different colored t-shirts. You know, the NRCS people aren't all dressed in blue, and the district people are all dressed in green, and the FSA people all dressed in yellow. When they go in there, they don't know who works for who. And so there's this eternal confusion about what program it is. Is it an FSA program? And then during my career, NRCS went from being a technical assistance providers to getting a checkbook where they could actually write checks. And I tell them I liked you guys better before you had money. But because I feel like their technical assistants took a hit when they started paying for the stuff. But anyway, people that go in there, the public, a farmer goes in there, he doesn't know if Pollard works for NRCS, FSA, or the Logan County Conservation District. So there are some newspaper articles that go out. There are PowerPoint presentations that get made at farm meetings and things like that. But I'm not sure that the original pop that leadership was looking for on the cost share program really happened. But I think it's tied up in how the public, they know it's conservation, they just don't know who's conservation. And we even see some district boards that don't understand the distinction between the federal program and the state program. And I don't know how you fix that. I mean, we worked on it a million years and campaigned around on it, and people still are doing that today. But the program is doing good. I mean, they're getting a lot of good work on the ground. It's a good way to put money back into the community. It's a good way to spend tax dollars on things that make Oklahoma a better place to live. All that's good. And I don't mean to sound down about the cost share, because I'm not. But it just, on the front end, I think we were hoping for more recognition of conservation districts as a community entity that was doing good things. And I'm, in some places that's happened, but not like I think we envisioned that it could. So that was cost share.
Recognize the value of it, yes.
Yeah. What was the other thing you mentioned?
When you left, decided.
Oh, when I left?
Deciding to leave.
Oh.
Unless there's something else you want.
Couple of things. We had come to the pinnacle of watershed program work in that we were in 2000. Congressman Lucas passed some amendments to the Public Law 566, rehab amendments of 2000, that authorized NRCS to do rehabilitation work on these dams. And we were fixing to start that. And I had worked hard on that. I had worked as an Oklahoma member of the Watershed Coalition in getting that legislation to be put forward, and then subsequently worked on the passage of it. But a couple of things. I really wasn't looking forward to the administration of the rehab contract stuff. And that's just because my attention span's pretty short. And it just wasn't, it's not my cup of tea, the contracting stuff. I can do it, I've done it, but just wasn't kind of where I wanted to go. So I was kind of trying to figure out, well, what do I do now? And what am I going to do? And in the meantime, I'd been pretty active. I'd been the Secretary Treasurer of the Watershed Coalition and interacting with people from other states. And the most wonderful man in the world was the Executive Director of the Watershed Coalition, a fellow named John Peterson. Just can't say enough good things about him. Engineer, attorney, high-ranking military man and with a distinguished career, and deputy chief of SCS at one time in his career. Just a great guy, but he was ready to move on to something else. I would say retire, but that'd make me laugh out loud because really he just switched to something else. And John's got to be getting 90, on the high side of probably 90 now, and still, this year's the first year he told me this. He said this summer's the first summer I haven't mowed my own yard. And it's just the kind of guy he is. But anyway, brilliant man. But anyway, he was going to retire. He was going to leave the coalition. So I talked to him, talked to a couple of people about it. And they indicated that they'd hire me if I was interested in the job. Well, I chewed on that a while and decided I'd apply for it. And so I did, and there was going to be about a 4-month gap before they hired when John left and before they hired somebody. And being the incredible plan ahead guy that I am, I went ahead and just resigned at the commission. And that 4 months was the greatest 4 months of my life because it was deer season. So I was unemployed and it was deer season. I was living the high life. It was great. But then when December rolled around, I started working for the Watershed Coalition, and best job in the world, great people, doing what I like to do. You can be somewhat of a moving target. You can go in and tell people about wonderful things and this and that and the other, and you don't have to tell them about the banker that's going to spend $5 million to keep his house there. But you can tell them, no, you don't want things in your auxiliary spillway. But anyway, it's been a good job for me, and I take some pride there too, because shortly after I took the job, I say shortly, several years afterwards, with some of the shenanigans in Washington, D.C., Watershed, one of the Watershed funds got zeroed out in the budget. And when that happens, that's like death to ever get back in. And so we worked really hard for, I'm going to say, 6 to 8 years trying to get something back, and we finally did get something back in the budget. Then we were successful in getting some Watershed money in the ARRA funds that the Obama administration put out. Then we were successful in taking advantage of a couple other opportunities, and one of which was in the Farm Bill, and we got $250 million put in a couple of Farm Bills ago, which was, I got fun stories about that too. But anyway, we got that money put in. Then we started getting back into the regular appropriations process, and right now, if the infrastructure bill ever passes, it's sitting there, it's got $918 million in it for watershed work. That's on top of the regular appropriation process, which right now has about pretty close to $200 million in it. But we're rapidly approaching over $1 billion in the last 48 months for this program. Now, did old Dano do that by himself? Nope, I didn't. But I was in a place to be air traffic controller on some of it, and have people who are working on that every day, and keeping track of it, and have relationships and so on and so forth. So for this job, I started out training. I mean, I was doing workshops, training people. I still like to do that. COVID's kind of kicked that. I've become a webinar guy. I hated webinars. I was going, what a worthless deal, Anyway, I love them now. I think they're great. We've done 8 this last 20 months or so, and people have a webinar and they have 40 people get on, and we're having like 240, 250 people get on the webinar. I'm going, this is how to reach people. Yeah, they might be looking at their phones, eating, drinking beer, whatever, but you've got them. Yeah, you've got them. I just canceled, like I said, I canceled a meeting in Spokane where I'm supposed to be actually today because of COVID up there and low registration. And in November, we'll do that meeting virtually, and I'm thinking we'll have a healthy attendance. So instead of doing all the risk stuff, going to Spokane, having 30 people show up and 4 of them get sick, we'll sit right here, and I bet we'll have 250, 300 people, online for that deal. But anyway, so I'm a big webinar guy now. But I've started out with the coalition. My strong suit was training, because I had hands-on experience doing maintenance and contracting and doing those things, and so I could go and teach about those, and I knew people that had expertise in those areas, and I could line them up and have 15 speakers show up in Duncan and have 100 people from across the country come, and so that was my deal. And then at the end of them, we'd have a giant barbecue dinner, and everybody would think that was great, and we'd tour around on buses, we'd blow up beaver dams with the APHIS guys. We were on one of these workshops where they were going to blow a beaver dam, which was kind of for effect, because you mainly want to trap the beavers, leave the lodge, maybe break the dam, but if you blow it up, then they're not coming back to their right to trap. If you don't blow the lodge up, you can trap beavers out of that lodge this year, next year, maybe the year after, and you've got them right there, whatever. But anyway, we were going to blow up this beaver dam. We were down in Grady County, had 60, 70 people, had the buses parked over here, and we'd finish squirting water and doing all the things we were going to do. They're standing on the dam, and now APHIS is going to demonstrate blasting a beaver dam, which was a popular thing because you got logs and mud and beavers and stuff getting launched. I mean, like 300 or 400 feet in the air, I mean, it's pretty spectacular. So the APHIS guys are going through all their protocol for the explosives and everything. They get it all done, and they're talking to each other, and they have a whole checklist they go through as they do it to keep everybody safe. They light the fuse, and the wind picks up. I see the wind blow the Johnson grass, and right there, just 60 yards from where this guy just lit this fuse, is a sign that says, "Warning, gas pipeline, call, blah, blah, blah." I'm going, oh, shit. Well, at that point, there wasn't much to do because there wasn't enough time to go back and, snuff it out. And I had all those people there, and I was going, please, Jesus. Anyway, it blew up. Nothing happened. So we dodged a bullet there. But that's one of my favorite workshop training stories. And from then on, people say, well, how far back do we get? And I'd say, well, you see that guy that's lighting it? And they said, yeah. I said, well, you want to certainly be behind him. So anyway, that was one of many adventures we had on that deal. But that was a little bit of a sick moment when the Johnson grass parted, and there was one of those white and black and red gas pipeline signs. So, but anyway, I transitioned really from doing training more to these days working with NRCS on their policy and guidance, responding to inquiries for information from congressional people. We have a Facebook page and a website, and it's amazing to me the calls I get from congressional staff that are perusing that stuff for information as they're dealing with legislation or have questions about how the program works. So that's kind of been a shift in what I do, but fun. Right now, the officer corps, the leadership team for NWC is all women except for me and the immediate past chair. So that's kind of unique. It's just good people to work with, and it makes me proud to have those women in leadership positions, and they all can make a hand and are doing good work. So I'm kind of pumped about that. My deal, as you are doing history, one of the things I do struggle with, being a 71-year-old guy, is making sure that I stay relevant and current on things. And my children remind me from time to time that I'm not really as relevant and current as I think I am. But professionally, I'm still working. I try to stay on top of the issues and stay on the top of the technology to, earn my keep and make sure that the Watershed program going forward has a good base under it and is utilizing. If there's technology out there, just like finding the camera in the corner of the sales room, if there is technology out there, whether it's drone technology or monitoring systems for water level, water quality, those kind of things, I want to be abreast of what's going on in the field. And continue to try to put the infrastructure created by this program in the spotlight, because I mean it represents a huge investment of tax dollars, a huge investment. Uh, if you had to do it today, you couldn't get it done. I've compared it to the VOTEC system in Oklahoma. If you when Francis Tuttle started the VOTEC system, they kind of were starting from scratch, and they started building schools, and they started employing people to do things. And then you look at the VOTEC system in Oklahoma today, and the campus facilities they have all around the state, and the volume of people that are going through there. If you had to do that today in the current, the political environment, the financial environment, the no tax mindset that we have, if you couldn't do that today. You could not create a program like that. You couldn't get enough people going in the same direction. Well, the Watershed program is a little bit like that too, in that there are so many more hoops that you have to jump through today than you did at the start. Were there structures built that probably shouldn't have? Oh yeah. Were there drainage projects that shouldn't have been done? Yeah. But in the time, in that setting, they weren't doing them to be harmful to the environment. And what they learned, they've implemented on the front end to be more green or environmentally friendly. But the investment, a structure in southeast Oklahoma that cost $123,000 to build in 1972 or something, that'd be a $7 million deal today. So to preserve that investment and keep the benefits coming on that investment is a really huge deal. When you think there are 11,841 of them across the United States, that's a tremendous investment in money, people, resources, and then the benefits they yield. And I don't know that we can get that done. If the infrastructure bill passes, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in so many different sectors. Do we still know how to do infrastructure? I don't know.
Well, a lot of them have reached their 50-year life, so that may not be enough funds to keep them up and going.
I might need to crack a beer if we're going to talk about 50-year lifespans. But it's just there are a lot of barriers that to a 71-year-old guy look a little foolish, and in some cases you got the Fox Garden in-house. You got NRCS water projects that are delayed because they can't get a Corps of Engineers permit, and then you got the Corps of Engineers over here doing flood control projects and so on, and then so you got the Corps creating some issues, and you got EPA creating some issues, and you got NRCS creating issues for themselves, and it could be simpler and more straightforward in my old brain, but it ain't gonna get that way. So you have to figure out how to work with it, work around it, and get it done. And you have to. It's important to me that going forward, that the projects that are selected and done are good projects that have that benefit from the mistakes of the past, that they're engineered the very best. They take into account environmental concerns that have been raised from the past. I was on a lake in Virginia with a tour group, touring people around, some congressional staff and some new NRCS National Office employees. A lake that provides a water supply for a city there in Virginia. If it's not winter, in the wintertime you can hear traffic on the Beltway. In the fall you can't because of the leaves and so on and so forth. But when they built that lake, in the upstream end of it, the upper end of it, where it's usually a shallower deal, they created some wetland cells. They created these shallow water areas. They brought in plants from other wetlands in Virginia area and put them in there. The day I had these people there looking, there were 2 bald eagles sitting in a big tree right straight across the lake, and people they were I was going, yeah, we planned that for you. But that's just a model project. It provides water supply. It has wetlands functions and values and benefits that are, I mean, where else are you going to see 2 bald eagles sitting over a beautiful lake like that? It's just, the projects that get done need to be good projects. And the projects that get done need to have not just the engineering component provided, but they need to have an environmental component that goes with them. One of the things some people don't realize about the Watershed program is that to go out and build a dam or build a lake, there has to be a certain percentage of land in the upstream area under conservation treatment. So there's land treatment that goes with the structure. Now, the other thing we're seeing is a move in some areas of the country away from the traditional dam building type programs and looking at irrigation efficiencies and water transport systems in the northwestern United States. That's a big thing right now. So people always say the Watershed program has all this flexibility built in, and it does. Just so happens that where I grew up, the structural side of it was the big deal, embankments, that kind of thing. But it's being used to address acid mine drainage. It's being used to address some water quality issues in areas that the geology doesn't lend itself real well to septic systems, even though septic systems are everywhere there. But they're cleaning up streams with it. They're treating acid mine drainage. In Hawaii, they redid some irrigation ditches to make them more environmentally friendly, and so it can do good things. It's just kind of you got the guidelines and the rules over here, and your imagination over here, and like a Venn diagram, somewhere it overlaps, and that's where the fun stuff is, and the things that are good for the state and good for the environment. So.
Well, and then you throw in climate change and extreme weather change.
One of, if not the premier program in the NRCS portfolio for addressing climate change. One of the things that changing climate has done is shifting rainfall patterns, and you have this area that has all these watershed structures that are there because of the climate at the time. You have areas that are now receiving rainfall that have never received it before, that probably need to consider the watershed program in terms of addressing some of the issues created by those rainfall events. You have rainfall events that are getting larger. Am I sounding like Clay yet?
You're getting close.
Anyway, it is one of the premier programs in their portfolio for addressing climate change issues. And it's great that we're getting ready. We can say the word climate now, because in the circles we run in for a long time, that's kind of a bad word. Or people, well, I won't go there. But anyway, there are some organizations, World Wildlife Fund and others, that are doing climate work around the world, and one of the things that they're doing is creating water sources and flood control and some things like that. And in the past, historically, in the recent past, I guess, some of those groups have been real anti-watershed. When I say anti-watershed, anti-dam, and watershed dams are way different than Corps of Engineers dams and BLM dams or BOR dams and stuff. But anyway, some of the critics of the program in their international programs are utilizing some of the same technology in developing countries. And so to me, that kind of validates the opportunities that the watershed program presents for both quality and quantity issues here at home. getting an engineer to have a conversation with you about that sometimes more difficult than someone who has some strange college degree where they have multiple things all coming together. But it's, I believe, one of the best tools in the NRCS toolbox for addressing climate change, some of the difficulties it presents.
Well, we'll change gears just a little bit.
Okay.
At some point, you were on the Lincoln County Conservation District
I was.
Board of Directors.
Yes.
That couldn't happen while you, well, I don't know. Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things that I laugh about, and I guess I take pride in, but I laugh about, is that I worked for a conservation district. I worked on the interagency agreement for SCS. I worked for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission for all those years. And after I left there, I did wind up on the Lincoln County Conservation District Board and was chairman for a while, and also was an Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts Area 2 representative. So I kind of covered the waterfront with affiliations and opportunities, you know, on where to be. But I got I was asked to run for that board position, and I got beat. I had 137 votes, and the guy that won it had 139, and all of his votes were in one town. And later, it turned out that he and his wife had really gotten out and beaten the bushes and stuff to get the votes. And I ran a campaign ad in the paper that said something to the effect, you know, that if I wasn't running for this, I'd probably vote for Marvin Evans too. and he and I became good friends. But then some guy resigned off that board, and I filled his position, and then was on there for a while. I might even had to run once after that. I don't remember. But that was interesting. There were some watershed related issues in that county that I had dealt with as an employee that continued, and as a board member, I was a local sponsor, so we had responsibilities for it. On the bright side, the guy that beat me in the election, and he and I had a personal friend there that was an attorney that also happened to be the attorney for the gentleman who had all the issues. And so after all kinds of bad blood in the past and so on, we went down and visited with our attorney friend, and he said, yeah, I'll ask him to come in. And he said, you guys come in, we'll sit down and talk. So we all met down there at the lawyer's office, and we really needed to build a lot of trust and so on and so forth. And it worked out. The funny part about that was Mike Thralls asked me after that, well, how did it go? I said, well, were your ears burning? He said, why? I said, well, you know, about 5 minutes into the deal, I said, this guy, he was cussing you and calling you all kinds of names and everything. I said, Marvin and I just sitting there going, hell yes, yeah, that son of a bitch. And we just let him go, you know. And then from then on, though, Marvin and I, we were good guys. That Mr. Evans, he's straight up, and I really appreciate you taking I don't know how many times I talked to that gentleman at night on the phone, and it just, you know, it would go on for, 45 minutes or an hour, and finally he'd get tired, and I'd thank him for calling and going. But and he's deceased now, but we got that deal worked out, and we used a kind of an innovative technological fix for it too. He had a blue-green algae problem, and people didn't know too much about blue-green algae at the time, except that it was toxic and so on and so forth. Well, there were several things going on there on that site, and there was some history that had these folks upset before blue-green algae ever showed up, but blue-green algae was just kind of icing on the cake. And anyway, we worked around the deal and put some pumps, aerator pumps in that lake, and got the blue-green algae thing under control. We were able to access the property and do soil sampling and show some fields of phosphorus in the pasture where cattle had been fed in the past that were, contributing to some of the issues in the lake. Anyway, we got people educated. We got a reasonable fix. We stayed on top of it. We addressed the people part of it. Whenever it needed to be addressed, we stopped what we were doing and took care of it. When I was still working at the commission, I double fenced it. I put a fence at the back off of the water's edge around there, and then I backed up to where the flood pool was and put a fence around it, put gates in them. And everybody said, "Why are you doing that for?" I said, "So that when we're at flood stage, you can close that gate right there and the cattle cannot get to that water. When it's not at flood stage, you can open that up and they can graze all around in between those fences, but you still control whether the cattle have access to the water in the lake," which was one of the man's alleged grievances, was that some cattle had died from drinking that stuff. And anyway, but then later there I found myself, being the chair of the board that was the sponsors. And he didn't think too highly of two of my favorite bosses, Mr. Mungle and Mr. Thralls. And so that day, Marvin and I just let him rip. Boy, he was that Mike Thralls this and that Mike Thralls that. And the whole time I was trying to keep from laughing while I was sitting there listening. But anyway, we fixed it. It was an eye opener being on that board and being chair. Gained a totally different perspective than I had, and I'd worked 28 years in this field, but I hadn't sat on a board and been responsible and been the recipient of all of the excess technical assistance that the Conservation Commission can provide. We had some personnel issues that we had to work through that weren't fun at all, but we got through them. We were instrumental in starting the Cross Timbers Prescribed Burn Association there. We have one member there, another legendary guy. I don't know if that guy's been interviewed or not. Have you guys interviewed Verlin Hart?
Not yet.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Just a jewel of a man. And with the district and then with Verlin's influence, they got the Cross Timbers Prescribed Burn Association started, and we'd have a burn and there'd be like 10 guys show up. And at the time I was 65, so I was the youngster in the group, and burning lots and lots of acres. They had a building they had built that they were paying on, and we did some work on the building, and then we determined we're going to build a shop. So I built a shop while I was there, and we paid it off. So the district's sitting there with a building paid and a shop building paid. Then we worked with the commission to get a set of watershed equipment. Lincoln County has, I think, 63 upstream flood control sites. So we put a set of equipment in there, and that had been a sore spot at Lincoln County for a long time. You get districts that lose their identity maybe, and then they take on the identity of the NRCS employees there, and that district had kind of gone to sleep at the wheel, and they were trying to wake up before I got there, but they didn't really know all the possibilities and the options, and I did, because I'd worked up there and I knew who to talk to, and I knew I knew the conservation district law, and I laughed because a lot of meetings we would having a discussion, and I'd always say, "Now, don't tell Lisa." but they were just sitting on the verge of doing some good things, and I knew how to unlock some of the boxes and did those, and that led to more. And they have a really good program over there right now. But anyway, we got some commission bond money and got some equipment in there, and Watershed structures are in better shape in Lincoln County than they've been in a long time. We started doing some outreach stuff. We had a Noble Foundation grazing workshop that we held there in Lincoln County, and had, I don't know, probably had 70 or 80 people there. And they've had 2 or 3 deals since then. I went down there 2 weeks ago, I guess. They had their first Watershed Dam owners meeting. They had served a meal down at Meeker, and had they limited it to 50 because of the size of the room, but they had 50 folks that came, and they had me talk to them a little bit about the Watershed program and so on. So they're still doing the outreach stuff. 4 of us even had masks on.
So you were there about roughly in a time
Oh,
here?
Time flies when you're having fun. We came up here. Let me think. Built this house in 2017. Lived down there in that old house for a couple of years. That'd put us in 15. Commuted back and forth. So, I don't know, 20. I don't know if I was on there in 2010 or not. I don't know. Unlike some of my colleagues that have an incredible record of everything they ever did, every publication they ever made, every meeting they ever attended to, or any webinar they ever participated in, I don't know.
Well, you've done good.
I don't know what I did yesterday. So, whatever it was made me really sore today.
So but, around 10 years. 10 years.
I know I got a 5-year pin, and I might have got more than that. I don't remember. I just when we moved up here, I had to get off. Yeah. I knew the rules. There were people that didn't want me to, but I knew the rules, and I was going, no, I'm done.
Well, is there a board here?
There is. There's one in Pawnee. Yeah.
You have to produce something to be on it.
No.
You have to be a cooperator.
Yeah, you just have to be a district cooperator.
And vote in the Pawnee County.
Yeah.
Registered voter.
Yeah. And you also have to have a spouse that wouldn't kill you if you got back on it.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
I know if the volunteer takes your time.
Yeah, but the Lincoln County stuff was really gratifying because we got a lot of good work done, and had really good people to work with. Like I say, we had some rough times, but by and large, it was all good. But I was done, and when I came up here, I've kind of thought about it. I've helped this district. I helped them get some prescribed burn stuff, but it's a different district. They got a little different history than Lincoln County does, and it's one of those deals that no matter, I've been in this country since 1982, one way or another, either deer hunting or camping or working or something, going to the Pawnee County Bankers Awards dinner and so on, and knowing people. But I'm still not from here, and that's a factor on boards. You know, Lincoln County, how I fell into that was a little surprising to me because I'm not from there either. I'm from Clinton, Oklahoma. But you know, these guys that they got a deal, they got it like they want it, and I'm good with that. You know, if they came and asked me something, I'd probably tell them. But other than that, I just mind my own business here at the end of the dead end road, and, you know.
And look for painted buntings.
That's right. Who put you onto that deal? Have you been snooping my Facebook page?
I'll never tell.
Yeah. That, you talk about, that jazzed me up. I mean, that was like, I cannot tell you how I wanted to see one of those. And my friend Scott Shalloway, who used to be a professor at Oklahoma State over in wildlife ecology, bird guy, has, after he left Oklahoma State, he did birds for a living, for, you know, taking people on tours to all these places and all kinds of things, you know. And when I saw that painted bunting down there, I was so jacked about that. I was going, I've got to tell him. Well, he saw my Facebook deal because we're friends on Facebook, and he said, "Hey," he said, "do you mind if I lift that deal off of Facebook?" And because he did a radio show and TV column, or a radio show and newspaper column, 2 or 3 things about birds in Pennsylvania when he lived there, and he took that Facebook post and made it into one of his articles or something. I got a kick out of that. But yeah, this is a bird. Well, bald eagles, they really tripped my trigger, and I've stood in that window and watched them perch in a tree right here. I have seen 7 or 8, I guess, at one time on my crop fields down there, roosting in the trees up and down through there. Had the lady from the Sutton Research Center that lives in Ponca that's come down a couple of times. She does eagle surveys and nests, and we had a nest down here on the river, and she wanted to see it, so I took her down there, and there wasn't any sign it was active anymore. That I don't go down there and hang out, you know, you don't want to bother them or anything, but when we found it, there were feathers, droppings, fish heads, and this and that and the other under it, so it was in use. Well, a year later or so, I took her down there because she called and wanted to see. I said, "Well, yeah, come, I'll take you." So I took her down there, and we were milling around, determined it wasn't active, and it's right on the riverbank. And so we're standing there looking at that and having that discussion about it not being active. And about that time, a bald eagle comes down the river and plops down in the river 50 yards from us right there, then comes out with a fish and flies to the Osage County side and flies up in a tree. Well, when it does, we get to looking with the binoculars and the spotting scope. There's 2 eagle nests. They've moved across the river, and there were 2 or 3 eagles perched around over there. So up here, when you come through the stop sign at the end of the driveway, there were, I guess it was when those cows in that pasture were calving, there were 4 or 5 eagles up there for a week or 2. So those jazzed me up. But the songbirds and stuff, really, they kind of pumped me up. I was out early this morning, and it was September blue jay time. They were over there in the trees calling to each other and so on. But that's one of the fun things about living here is the stuff you kind of share the place with. Vermilion flycatcher. What I think was a summer tanager, but I'm not sure. But the painted bunting deal was cool because I couldn't believe my eyes. And then I realized that on my stinking phone, I had this Audubon deal that had the birds, pictures, information, and a recording. And I hit that recording and held it to the window of the truck. And that thing came right down there from me to you and set on big barbed wire while I was playing that call. And I was going, oh man, this is too much. But anyway, a lot of people would really think that's strange, but I really, it pumped me up. But,
So in your pickup truck, you always have binoculars
yeah.
for the most part?
Yeah, there's a little bitty spotting scope over there in the window that I brought in here. I don't remember what I was trying to see, but usually it's on the dash of the pickup, and usually there's a rifle in there with a scope on it too. But you know, there's something about looking at bald eagles through a rifle scope that's there's something wrong about that. But
Yeah.
when it's calving time or in the winter, or we do have a big feral pig thing problem. A friend of mine and I, in about 40 months of trapping, trapped over 2,800 pigs out of the river bottom from here to 2 miles that way.
2,800?
2,800, yes ma'am. And so some of them get dispatched and some of them are disposed of, but there's lots of pigs. Between here and where I buy feed for my cows, there's a field that somebody night hunts it, I guess, because certain times of the year there'll be 5 or 6 dead pigs laying out in that wheat field, and when there is, you sit there just a minute, here they come. There'll be eagles everywhere, you know. And I told somebody, I said, that's probably the ultimate good use for a feral hog is a smorgasbord for. But you see, you know, juveniles and 2 or 3 adults all out there, you know, on those dead pigs. That may not be a environmentally sensitive or culturally acceptable thing, but it's a cool place to see
It's
eagles.
that cycle of ecology.
That's right.
Isn't it?
That's right.
We passed some turkey buzzards coming in.
Yeah, the last 2 batches of turkey buzzards I saw up close and personal were on 2 calves down here. I lost 2 calves within a week of each other down there. I think coyotes probably, but anyway.
While we're off topic just a little bit, do you want to tell us the 3 wise men the story of the 3 wise men?
Oh, I wanted to acknowledge those guys and let them know how much I appreciated. It was Roland and Max and Mavis, and anyway, so I don't know, that 3 wise men deal just came to me because they were wise and there were 3 of them. So anyway, I just sat down and wrote to them about, you know, how I felt and what they'd meant to me and how much I appreciated them. Which I guess you ought to do that more, you know. I always felt really, really thankful and enriched, if you will, from getting to work with Ben. There was a time in his career when he was tasked with supervising me, which probably was not, you know, his favorite day at the office, but we did some good work together. We both have kind of a skewed sense of humor and looking at the world, and you know, it was fun to go to work and see Ben Pollard. There were some folks that it wasn't so fun to see, but you know, he and I did some good work together, and it's always good in the office maybe to be able to take a break from some of the serious stuff, you know, and spend 10 minutes visiting about this, that, or the other. I believe it was when Laura was pregnant with your first child. He and Laura showed up and they said, "We come with us. We're going to go down here to this park down the street from the office and have a picnic." And went down there and they told me they were going to have a baby. So still remember that. We had a pretty good run.
Seems like the early days were more of a family, had that more of a family feel.
They did, and I mean, and honestly, this is a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is one of Solomon's management techniques was what I call management by family. You come in here, you know everybody's business, who's having a baby and whose kids selling cookies and everything there is to know. And then you have a softball team where you go and you socialize after work and you're part of the team. And you have a creative guy that's doing all this team publicity and just, a couple of baseball nuts that know the stats and everything. I mean, and make it fun. But it's a family kind of a deal. And some people are more adept at management by family than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some people made you want to be part of the family, and then there were others that demanded you were part of the family, and that's the bad part. There probably were some times that some people were a little overbearing on the family deal, and it's not good for everybody to know all your business. But so there was a period there that I call management by family. Then there's one of the funniest things I ever saw or heard of that falls in the vein of total quality management, TQM. We're big TQM guys, man. Was this new management technique called management by walking around. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, the supervisor should be on his feet or her feet, going to cubicles and checking in and laying hands on this work and that work and doing all that stuff. But management by walking around, I'm going, I hope nobody paid too big a consulting fee to come up with that. But, just stuff like that would, Ben and I would crack up on that stuff. And then the whole, the whole bureaucracy. We fought pretty hard for district employees and district people to be first-class citizens, because there was this culture there that you had the federal people that were the authorities and that somehow were better than everybody else that was working there, and that wasn't so. And we spent a good part of our career creating an atmosphere where district employees could excel, where districts had the resources to put good people in place to help district boards hold employees accountable, and those kinds of things. And it's still not maybe where it should be, but it's way better than it used to be. And I'd like to think that we have a little something to do with the laying the groundwork for that ongoing effort. But by the same token, I don't know how you are about this, but almost everybody's replaceable. So, you may think your way is the only way to do it, or that you were the best at this, that, or the other. But, there comes a time when you just, you need to move on and recognize that there are lots and lots of talented people out there, and people that have better ideas than you've ever dreamed of, and people that have better skills than you do in same areas or different areas, and that it's time to kind of let it go and watch it grow. So
Micromanage.
yeah, well, or micromanage from afar. I mean, when I left there, I don't think I went back in that office for more than a year.
Yeah.
I was just going, whatever's coming needs to be established on its own, and I'd be glad to answer a question. The guy that moved into the job I had he asked me a question. I sat down. I said, well, there's this. You need to look out for that. You got a problem here. blah, 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 but that's about it. Of course, I don't know that he paid any attention to any of that, but, you know, once I said it, I was done. And, you know, it was his deal to do. And, you know, he saw some of that different and did some things different, but, you know, hey, it was his deal. So, and the same, you know, I think about that. I'm not ready to quit doing what I'm doing today, but I think about that all the time, that I want to make sure that the Watershed Coalition has a base under it, a solid foundation. But are there things that somebody else could do better than me? Absolutely. Are there other things that will need to be done that I'm not very good at or haven't even thought of yet? Absolutely. But if I can put a base in place where someone has the luxury to have some thinking time to chart the path, then I'll think I did good. Leave it better than I found it, or not quite as broke.
That's always a good thing.
Anyway.
Do you have any other questions, Ben?
I think it's time to ask him the last question, Tanya. He's just kind of transitioned to that.
My last question is usually when history is written about Dan Sebert, what do you want it to say? How do you want to be remembered?
He was a terrible Baptist and a damn fine Methodist.
Yeah, amen.
You'll have to explain. You said on the back row or the front row? No.
Well, that was the good part about the Methodist deal, is you could be an usher and you could sit clear outside the sanctuary. You know, you didn't have to get in there. But I don't know. I'd like to. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who showed up, did their work, treated people well, and had the ability to laugh at themselves and poke a hole or two in the bureaucracy.
Okay. And enjoy bird watching.
Yeah, I do. I enjoy birds and all kinds of outdoor stuff, and just there's some cool stuff on this place that are, you know.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us today.
Well,
it's been great.
Thanks for coming. I was excited when Ben called and was talking to me about it, and I thought, well, do I need to practice? Do I need to get something out and look at it so I can remember last week?
No,
But
you did great.
it was fun. I enjoyed spending time with you.